Good afternoon, everyone. It's my privilege to open this panel discussion as part of Sustainable Finance Week Ireland 2024. My name is Aisha McCaffrey. I'm a director in Grant Thornton, Ireland, and I'm also co-chair of 100 Women in Finance Early Career Committee in Dublin. For those of you who aren't familiar, 100 Women is a global organisation committed to gender equity in finance by promoting diversity, raising visibility, and empowering women to find their personal path to success. With over 35,000 members globally, we connect women at every career stage, including pre-career, to a global network of people and resources. There have been some really engaging sessions so far as part of Sustainable Finance Week. Personally, absolutely loved hearing from Ed Norton and Mary Robinson yesterday at the AIB Sustainability Conference, and also hearing from local businesses and what they are doing to move the dial. I think it's fair to say that in our drive to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we're faced with a range of complex issues that require the development of innovative solutions. Our focus today, advancing gender equality through sustainable finance, is both timely and necessary, especially given the progress and persistent challenges in this area. Gender equality, as emphasised by the UN Women Gender Snapshot in 2024, is essential to achieving the SDGs. However, global progress on SDG 5 remains insufficient. Every year, gender equality costs the world approximately 10 trillion in lost economic potential. These losses are not just numbers, they represent untapped innovation, unrecognised talent, and unrealised societal progress. The financial sector holds the power to change this trajectory, and in doing so, to reshape the global economy for the better. Ireland has seen promising strides in advancing gender equality within the financial sector. Initiatives like the Women in Finance Charter, launched in 2022, have brought together almost 91 signatory firms, accounting for more than half the employees in Ireland's financial services sector. These organisations are actively addressing gender imbalances by implementing training, flexible working policies, and better succession planning, to name a few. The Charter serves as a blueprint for how industry-led change can foster diversity and create opportunities for women at all levels. However, challenges remain. The gender pay gap in Ireland stands at 9.3%, and only 25% of the top 1% of earners are women. Women are also underrepresented in leadership roles, holding 18% of C-suite positions globally. At the same time, the rise of social finance initiatives like hybrid loans and impact-driven investment models has strengthened Ireland's capacity in particular to support community-driven change and gender equity in financing. These innovative tools are helping to bridge the gap for marginalised groups, including women-owned businesses. Today's panel will dive into these challenges and opportunities. Our esteemed speakers bring unparalleled expertise and diverse perspectives. With us today, we have Zara Hussey, Director of International Relations at Cardinals, Andrew Bowley, International Head of Sustainability at Wells Fargo, Joanna Thompson de Colonges, co-founder of 100 Women in Finance in Paris and Dublin, Sarah Thompson, Partner and ESG Lead at Arthur Cox, and Kathy Bryce, Managing Director of Capital Markets in AIB and President of the BPFI. Post the panel discussion today, you will hear insights and outputs from the upcoming social finance report provided by Rory Sullivan, CEO of Chronos Sustainability. And just before we kick off, I want to acknowledge the significant work being done under the Financial Centres for Sustainability Gender Finance Charter. That's a mouthful. A key framework for driving gender equity in finance. The Charter outlines 10 actionable principles that guide financial actors to create gender-responsive practices, products, and policies. I'm delighted to hand over to Delfina Monteverdi, Programme Coordinator at FC4S, who will present more on the Gender Finance Charter and its critical role in advancing sustainable and inclusive finance. Delfina will provide a closer look at how these principles are being turned into action, ensuring gender equity is not just a commitment, but a measurable outcome. Thank you all for joining us today, and I look forward to an engaging and impactful discussion. Hi, Delfina. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Super.
Good afternoon, everyone, joining us both in person and online. It's an honor to address this audience today about advancing gender and social equality in finance. I want to start by thanking the organization for the invitation today and congratulate the International Sustainable Finance Center of Excellence for putting together this exceptional Sustainable Finance Week. So let me start by, as Aisling was saying, I will start by sharing some insights into how UNDP Financial Centers for Sustainability Network is working to embed gender equality into sustainable finance practices globally, and also to provide some valuable context to help frame the discussions of the distinguished panel. So just to give a quick introduction on what UNDP Financial Centers for Sustainability Network is, we are a coalition of 44 financial centers globally, working to align financial markets with the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement. We are part of the UNDP Sustainable Finance Hub. UNDP operates in 170 countries and territories, working to eradicate poverty, reduce inequalities, and build resilience so countries can sustain progress. Its Sustainable Finance Hub supports countries' efforts to build a sustainable financial architecture that advances SDG-aligned investment decisions. So today, as Aisling was highlighting just a few minutes ago, I wanted to start by saying that gender equality lies at the heart of the Sustainable Development Goals. It is both a standalone goal and a cross-cutting priority, touching 53 of the 251 SDG indicators. We've seen that gender-focused finance is gaining traction as a viable and profitable strategy during the last years. And for instance, capital raised through gender lens private equity, venture capital, and private debt vehicles increased more than fivefold between 2017 and 2021. This trend signals growing recognition of the value of gender equality in finance. But gender equality, it's not just a moral imperative or a social responsibility, it's also a business opportunity. Research shows that companies with gender diverse executive teams are 21% more likely to outperform the market in profitability. For ethnic and cultural diversity, companies are 33% more likely to outperform on profitability. And impact investors during the last years have been increasingly focused on gender equality, with 71% targeting SDG 5, which is SDG on gender equality. And finally, advancing gender equality could add $13 trillion to the global GDP by 2030, fostering social and economic development. So despite this, financial flows towards gender equality remain disproportionately small. So this underscores the need for focused strategies to close the funding gap. FC4S, the FC4S network, representing $85 billion in market capitalization and constituting 82% of the global equity market through the members' financial centers, can act as a channel to advance gender finance. Why? Because financial centers like the International Sustainable Finance Center of Excellence in Ireland act as communities of practice and engagement, facilitators of partnerships and frameworks. They are usually leaders in data collection and market transparency of sustainable finance, and they are vehicles for capacity building and sustainable finance education. But they are also facilitators of innovation and drivers in policy formulation and financial practices. So all these efforts position FC4S and financial centers as critical catalysts for integrating gender equality into the financial system. In 2022, the FC4S Gender Finance Working Group was established to address member demand for leadership in gender finance. We have been working with financial centers on a gender finance agenda. So the working group provided in September 2023 a structured framework for advancing gender finance, which is the FC4S Gender Finance Charter. It defines 10 actionable principles to advance gender finance globally. And 21 financial centers of the FC4S network signed the FC4S Gender Finance Charter in 2023. Their commitments have been guided by the FC4S Gender Finance Booklet, which was launched on Gender Finance Day at COP28 and co-developed by UN Women. This is a comprehensive guide that provides with knowledge and tools to financial centers to help implement the charters, the principles of the Gender Finance Charter. And finally, we are now working with financial centers to turn their commitments into actions through gender finance initiatives and capacity building activities. So the Gender Finance Booklet not only serves as a comprehensive guide for financial centers, but also can be applied to financial institutions and the financial sector in general. You will find in the Gender Finance booklet not only the 10 principles of the Charter, but also 41 actions and 69 tools for gender finance integration, 26 indicators for tracking progress, and 8 case studies showing successful applications of the principles. So today I wanted to use the tools and analyses in the Gender Finance booklet from FC4S to provide some context on and try to highlight the role of the financial sector in gender equality. So we know that financial institutions can have a critical role in closing gender gaps in financial leadership and decision-making. Women have traditionally been underrepresented in the financial services industry, evident in leadership and leadership representation and employment. And so consider these statistics. Globally, women hold 18% of C-suite positions in financial services in 2022. And in the European Union, that same year, around 32% of board members of the largest publicly listed companies were women. In terms of working conditions and pay gap, women in the European Union earn over 12% less per hour than men, with improvement since 2018. But for example, sexual harassment affects 23% of women in workplaces in the European Union. And finally, in terms of participation in investment decision-making, women make up only 8% of senior investment professionals globally, though gender-balanced investment teams in emerging markets, for example, report a 20% higher net internal rate of return. What can financial centers and financial institutions and the financial sector in general do? So the principles in the Charter say that the financial sector should lead by example and promote gender equality internally with policies, with gender responsive policies and practices. In principle 2, suggest that the financial sector should integrate gender equality and other diversity requirements into stakeholder relations. And we also find in the Charter that Principle 4 says that the financial sector should encourage women's leadership and representation in the financial ecosystem. Investors and financial institutions can also play a role in scaling finance to drive gender equality. So we know that a strategic effort is required from financial actors to accelerate gender finance. The growth of private funds with gender focus is promising, increasing from 58 in 2017 to 206 in 2021. Gender lens equity funds reached an impressive $4.3 billion in assets under management by June 2023. However, financial flows towards gender equality remain disproportionately small compared to other impact areas. So for example, in 2022, Sustainable bonds aligned with SDG 5, gender equality, accounted for only 1% of the amount issued that year through sustainable bonds. What can be done? Enhance transparency on gender performance, set gender targets, and design and implement gender-responsive financial products and financial practices. Finally, we also know that women face significant barriers in accessing financial products and services. Much work remains to ensure that women can access and use a full range of financial products and services suited to their needs. Financial literacy, confidence, and access remain key challenges. So, for example, women are 31% more likely than men to have inactive accounts, highlighting the gap between access and actual usage. Women-owned SMEs face a credit gap of $1.4 to $1.7 trillion. In 2023, startups founded solely by women raised just 1.8% of the total capital invested in venture-backed startups in Europe. And addressing these gaps, financial literacy, equitable access, could unlock an additional $5 to $6 trillion in global net value. What actions are needed? We need to empower women through financial awareness and education, and we also need to enhance access to finance for women-owned and led companies. So for more resources and tools, I invite you to visit the FC4S website. Advancing gender equality in sustainable finance requires collaboration, cooperation, and innovation. So through the gender charter, the gender booklet, and other initiatives, FC4S provides a roadmap for driving this transformation. So I invite you all to engage with us, whether adopting the principles, leveraging our resources, because together we can build a financial system that champions equality and sustainability. So, thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions, Ashley.
Super, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Delfina. That was great. Just really interesting to hear in a bit more detail about the initiative itself. So thank you very much. One of the questions I had for you was just in relation to the Gender Finance Working Group. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about how that working group collaborates with external stakeholders, just to kind of, I guess, enhance the reach and effectiveness of the gender finance initiatives?
Yes, of course. So the working group plays a really important role in fostering knowledge exchange and collaboration among financial centers. So we usually curate capacity building initiatives. These include peer learning sessions, workshops with financial centers. We also support webinars. And what we try to do there is to bring to cover a wide range of stakeholders with our work. It allows our working group to pool resources, share diverse perspectives, but also align our efforts with established global standards and frameworks. So this ensures that our work and financial centers' gender finance initiatives are more comprehensive, scalable, and impactful. So we engage with different financial centers across diverse regions, recognizing their unique context, resources, and levels of expertise. But these centers also act as connectors between the public and private sectors locally. So we are not only in contact with financial centers, but also with actors from the public and private sectors, amplifying the reach of the work, or the efforts of the working group. And apart from that, we also build strategic partnerships. We partner with organizations like UN Women, but we also leverage UNDP's extensive network of experts to align our efforts with international frameworks, benchmarks. So these, to advance the gender finance agenda, it's important not only to access technical knowledge through UNDP technical expertise, but also to align our efforts with global benchmarks and also work with a wide range of stakeholders.
Super, that's brilliant. That's super, Delfina. And maybe just before I let you go, just in terms of looking ahead, could you maybe tell us what are kind of the next steps or priorities for the Gender Finance Working Group under the FC4S Charter?
Yes, of course. So our future priorities, I think the most important one looking ahead is broadening the commitment. We are aiming to renew and strengthen financial centers' commitment to gender finance by engaging leadership and stakeholders at every level, and also covering new financial centers globally, inviting them to join the working group and join the network. We will be deepening also our capacity building activities. So on 2023, we started by setting the scene with the charter and the booklet. This year, we activated gender finance by supporting financial centers to implement their gender finance initiative based on the charter. So our next step will be elevating gender finance practices, and we will be focusing on equipping financial centers, not only financial centers, but also their member financial institutions with advanced training on gender-sensitive financial practices and products. And of course, we also aim to continue expanding partnerships and strengthening collaborations at global and regional levels with a wide range of stakeholders of the financial sector.
Super, that's brilliant, Delfina. We'll look forward to seeing what comes next for the charter, and thank you so much today for making the time to speak to us. It's been great. Thank you very much.
No, thanks to you, and congratulations for this initiative.
Great stuff. Okay, I think yeah, a little clap is in order. Thanks, guys. I will now invite our panel up to the stage, if that's okay. Remember your seating order. Super stuff. Welcome, guys. Welcome, everybody. Great to see a few people in the room. I'm hoping we have Joanna online as well. So
you do.
We'll see if that kicks in at some point. Look, it was great to get that context, I think, from Delfina. Good for everybody online and in the room to get that context as well. Hey, Joanna, hopefully you can hear us okay. We can
I
see
can.
you.
I hope you can hear me.
Super, you're front and center on the big screen, so looking fabulous. So look, I guess in terms of getting stuck in, conscious we have a fantastic panel, so I don't want to waste any time myself blabbering on. So we might just get stuck straight in, and I'm going to come to you, Andrew, first, no pressure. So my first question to you is, how do you see the intersection of gender and social ambitions impacting the global finance industry today? Small question to start off with.
Yeah, absolutely. So very happy to tackle that. Thank you so much. And thanks. It's wonderful to be here. And you know, for us, this is a really important centre. And obviously, this is a really, really crucial topic for us. So, you know, I want to answer it by thinking about sustainability overall as a theme and sustainable finance and where sort of gender and social ambitions fit into that. And for me, it's really, sustainable finance is a big part of our business now. It's a big part of our thinking and approach. But there's a risk that we all end up thinking about climate. And obviously, climate is a big topic right now. And we all think about what happened with the US dynamics with the Trump election, and obviously we had the COP conference that finished last week. But gender and social dynamics are absolutely fundamental to the whole concept of sustainability for me, and these are really inseparable. You know, we do see debate sometimes, well, about why the E, the S, and the G kind of ended up being kind of tied together. It's fascinating for me. I actually spent 15 years working for a Japanese bank, and they've got this wonderful phrase in Japanese, which is Sampo Yoshi, which means three-way satisfaction. And the whole concept came out in sort of medieval times about the importance of society within any transactions. So this kind of three-way satisfaction was about making sure that the buyer, the seller, and society are happy with all activity. And that kind of mindset and mentality is so important and really at the heart of bringing together organizations, their stakeholders, and how we tie these together. And of course, when we do talk about things like environment, there are trade-offs. So the environmental development is a trade-off between the kind of social dynamics that exist out there. There are plenty of people in poverty who perhaps don't even have access to power. So we can't just talk about getting rid of oil and gas and fossil fuels without thinking about the social dynamics and how this evolves. So it has to be tied together, and it's really, really essential. And it's also fascinating for me to think back to the old sort of Friedman-based vision of capitalism. They talked about, so he talked in 1970 about capitalism only having one job to do, which is to make money. And the world has moved on a lot since then, thankfully. There are so many more stakeholders, and it's so crucial to a franchise now to get everything tied together, and having the social aspirations, having gender-based aspirations, have absolutely got to intertwine with that. And lastly, before I sort of pass the mic back, I think I've just always had this massive passion as well that diversity absolutely is essential. When we look at firms and sort of problems and developments that have existed out there, there's too many kind of echo chambers in our industry and in organizations. And we've got to get away from that. And diversity of thought is fundamental to healthy organizations. And diversity of thought and diversity of employment and staff and representation of society has to go at the heart of that vision.
Super. No, that's brilliant. Thank you for that, Andrew. That's great, and I'm glad that you're bringing up the diversity on our panel today as well, so thank you for that. So Zara, look, I might come to you next, and it would be fantastic to hear a little bit about your work. I know you're an ambassador with She Changes Climate, and maybe a little bit about the role the organisation plays in terms of promoting gender equality.
So as Aisling said, I'm ambassador, Ireland and UK ambassador for She Changes Climate. They're a non-profit organisation that work in closing the gender gap, and this is specifically for sustainability, but it comes across all levels of leadership across the board. So they grew out of COP26 when there was 0 women on the presidential committee, and it came actually as a campaign that was purely for that COP, to try and advocate that the presidential committee that is for the most pivotal conference in the climate space must represent the people that it's affecting. And gender is just one aspect of that. There's other marginalized groups as well that are much more affected than we are. And it then grew into a movement that COP26 is, as we all know, it's just one event of the year at the end of the day, and this mission is so much bigger than that. So since then, we've grown into, as I said, a non-profit organisation. We're working with now 24 ambassadors globally, and they're leading this mission of a 50-50 parity of men to women at all levels of climate decision making, but specifically for that seat at the leadership table. And the overarching goal is to see that when we put women at the table, when we give them a voice, that they are able to actually show and prove that there's going to be much more sustainable and better outcomes for everyone. And it's not so much as a requirement anymore. It's not something that you want to do to tick off the box. But it actually has proven that it will benefit everyone by having it. So that's the work that we're doing with She Changes Climate. As I said, I'm based here. That's kind of the work that I try to advocate for here. And it's all about, at the end of the day, showing the positive effects that it has. There's so much in the climate space that it talks about the kind of doom and gloom, and you want to try to change that narrative and just talk about the success stories and really how much of a positive impact it will have on people by implementing that 50-50 parity. So yeah.
Super, that's brilliant. It's so interesting. I love hearing a bit more detail behind it because I've seen the campaign, and which is, I actually didn't realize it was only from COP26, if that makes sense. So I think the brand is strong. So yeah, brilliant. Joanna, I'm going to come to you online. And hopefully you can hear me okay, but brilliant, great. So look, my question to you is, you've helped establish 100 Women in Finance, both in Paris and in Dublin, the committees there. Could you maybe give us and the audience a little bit of insight into kind of why the organisation was founded and its key objectives?
Certainly. You gave a little taste at the very beginning of your presentation. 35,000 members, 35 groups around the world. We're very proud of all of that, of which more than 10 are in Europe, 7 or 8 are in Asia, 3 are in Africa, 2 in the Middle East, and the rest in North and South America. Listening to Delfina, I kind of think where you and me and everybody else in 100 Women are kind of promoting what she and her organizations are trying to do. We were founded in 2001 in New York. 3 women got together and said, we need a group, we need to get together, we need a network where we can discuss business and non-business and work and life. In fact, they were all professionals in hedge funds at the time. A forum for women to discuss their work, their careers, their opportunities, their fears. Set up a bit along the lines of 85 Broads, which was an internal women's group that was set up in Goldman Sachs, I think one of the first. As I say, today we're 35,000. We put on 200 or 300 events. We have kind of 3 missions. There is the networking. There is the powering the engagement, i.e., meeting other people and supporting other people. There's the education element. And today our goals, if you like, we aim to support women broadly across the financial services industry throughout their careers. So you mentioned, you head up the Next Gen group in Dublin. We equally have a series of groups for women in mid-careers, senior practitioners. And then addition to that, we hope to be a platform and a showcase for the talent there is in the industry. So we have Fund Women, which is a major investment conference bringing together women fund managers and allocators. We have an initiative called Women in FinTech, which is what it says on the tin, and where in some of the centers they talk about not being enough women in tech. There aren't enough women in any of our industries, but the women in the tech centers that I know are making great strides. So we're very happy about that. And our overriding goal is what we call 30 by 40. We aim to have 30% of investment committees and executive committees of financial organizations be women by 2040. And that sounds like not very much and a long way away, but actually it's neither of those things. And we're hoping that with that sort of target, we've been working on it now for 3 or 4 years. We'll get there sooner and further by 2040. Part of that, and I don't need to tell anybody this, is that if people coming into any industry, whether they're women or any other minority, can't see people like them further up the ladder, then they're not going to try. So our biggest initiative over the last 3 or 4 years, we've been raising money for charities since we set up in 2001, but about in 2018, we set up a foundation which is really there to provide funding first of all, to students who are interested in finance, to give them free membership to our organizations, to attend our events, to participate in our different forums, and also to provide them with mentoring, to provide them with opportunities to discuss what it is we do in all our various, very, very different areas. And, you know, we're hoping and in certain areas, I mean, it's different in different locations, and I'll talk about that a bit in a minute, but giving people the right support to try and have a go is just really very important. And meeting people and discovering that, you know, we're not difficult to reach, we're not difficult to work with, we're not, you know, we're people like everybody else, if you like. I can see somebody smiling on the panel there. Is a real plus. And as Aisling said, I'm still involved in the Paris Committee, and we have probably 25 or 30 students who come to pretty much all our events, whatever they are. And they're super enthusiastic and interested, and they ask questions and they participate and so on. And that has to be, for us, the future of finance, and so that's who we are and what we do today.
Super. That's brilliant, Joanna. That's great. And yeah, it's great to hear the context as well, from humble beginnings to 35,000 is no mean feat. No, it's super. So Zara, then just to bring it back to some exciting pieces, spoiler alert, your role, so your partner in Arthur Cox, and just, I guess, from maybe like kind of a legal perspective, or from your kind of view, what barriers do you believe kind of still exist that prevent kind of that gender and social equality in finance?
Yeah, and first of all, I might pick up, so Joanna mentioned she saw someone smiling at the comment that we're not difficult to work with, and that was me. We're very easy to work with as a group of professional women, but except when you're on the other side of the negotiating table from us, we're as tough as they come. So we're as tough as you need us to be, and as difficult as you need us to be. So when it comes to legal barriers, you know, we're sitting in Ireland, and I think we all recognise that there has been significant progress in removing legal barriers to women's full participation in political and economic life. But I think it would be remiss of us not to acknowledge that we live in a global world, and that in many countries in the world today, there are significant direct legal barriers to women participating in the political and economic life at home. And so for them, some of the legal barriers we continue to face look like garden fences compared to the mountain ranges that they need to overcome. But having said that, I think for those legal barriers, a big part of it is that we are in a global financial system, and that as more women become engaged in that system and become active participants in the money that makes the world go round, that can drive societal change. So in many ways, you know, pursuing legal change is a worthwhile endeavour, and it is definitely a good thing. But as we're in the middle of Sustainable Finance Week, it's thinking about getting more women engaged in the finance of the world. And we saw some statistics earlier. It's not about shrinking the pie that men have, it's about growing the pie for everyone, because you have more people overall being involved in the global economy. And so you create greater prosperity for everyone. And I think that's an exciting point to make, and it's a good point to make, that yes, we're shifting the dial on percentages, but the overall numbers are growing because you're bringing more talented people into global markets. And at home, just when we're talking about legal barriers, to the extent our lawmakers are considering new policies, new budgets, it's always having an eye on the disproportionate impact that might have on women, but also others who have other diversity characteristics or points of difference. And we talked a lot yesterday about storytelling. So I've decided, I think an example is a good thing to bring forward. So with the recent UK budget, at first glance, the first budget delivered by a female Chancellor of the Exchequer looked to be very pro-women, with increased childcare and an increase to the minimum wage. But then a closer look looked at an increase in national insurance contributions from employers, which disproportionately impacts women because it has a bigger impact on low-paid jobs and part-time workers, who predominantly in the UK economy are women. So it's just an illustration of whatever our lawmakers or policymakers are pursuing, take a look at how it's maybe going to disproportionately affect a significant portion of your population. And I think gender's sort of the low-hanging fruit, because that's more or less 50% of your population. But also think about other characteristics as well.
Super. I love that example, Sarah, because I just think it really brings to the fore that piece on kind of, you know, what's under the hood a little bit, you know, and it's just, I think it's the same theme that runs through everything when we talk about sustainability more broadly, and whether it's greenwashing, but just getting to the actual crux of what the impact is, and bringing in that social element as well, like who are the people that you're impacting behind these decisions. Yeah. So
and it goes to this point we're saying that if you have more people at the table from different backgrounds, be that, you know, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, educational, the more likely you're going to have effective challenge at the table when that decision's being taken. And iron sharpens iron. That can only be a good thing.
Yeah, super. That's brilliant, Sarah. Kathy, then, so I'm going to come to you. As first female president of the Banking and Payments Federation of Ireland, first of all, congratulations. But, you know, you're paving the way, I guess, for greater inclusivity, a visible role model in the industry. I think I can say that. From your perspective, then, why is, and we talked about it a little bit, but why is gender diversity in finance and leadership so critical to the future of our sector, I guess?
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, the Banking and Payments Federation, I mean, it got a really nice spread a year ago when it came out, and I guess that was nice because of role modelling, and I always think of, you know, younger girls in particular, and trying to entice them into the industry. But what I didn't expect was actually the more mature cohort of women were really, it really struck a chord, to the extent that I got a phone call from a lady, and she was, her husband had retired, he'd worked in banking, I think they'd met in banking, and she'd had to leave the industry because of the marriage ban. She was in her 70s, and she went through the switchboard. I don't know how she even got through to me, but anyway, she came on the line, she said, I do know her personally, but distantly, and she specifically called to say, I just want to say it's so fantastic and whatever. So there is, you know, I guess is that just that broader impact, and over the years, so many women who worked in banking who are now retired, who never got the opportunities, right, to be in a leadership position. So I am very lucky, and I realise that. And well, like, going back to your question though. Why do we think it's important? I think first of all, and Sarah, you spoke about it there a minute ago, I mean, just balance in a management team. You know, I think modern management, be it financial services or a broader industry, feel that this is important. If we look back to what happened in the financial crisis, I remember maybe a year or two after the absolute horrors of what had happened, my wonderful mother said, it wouldn't have happened now if there was more women in that management team. And, you know, was she right? But I think there is a point to it, right? You know, there's a point, again, it's around diversity, it's around different thinking. Would a more diverse management team at those times have been more risk conscious, more balanced in their approach? It is much broader than gender. I think it's around a broad set of skills, and so that's one piece. I think the second piece for Irish banking is a pure fairness piece. So our workforce today is, I think, 55% female, 45% men. It's probably it has been in that range for a long number of years. Pre-financial crisis, we've had a lot of women working in the industry for years, and yet when we come to our senior management cohort, it's still sort of 65-35. Now, and Delfina's stats were interesting. AIB, we're very proud that we've, at an executive level, we've got a 50-50 split, which is fantastic. We have had for some period of time. At a board level, we're 50-50, but in our broader sort of senior management category, we're still struggling a little bit. And then the third thing, and it comes back to something Andrew said, you know, society is more demanding, and rightly so, of institutions now, and it wants institutions to represent all of society, you know. So we have regulator who wants a more balanced management team. We've government who wants to see diversity, our whole customer base is diverse, and broader society at large. So there are many reasons for this, and they're all good ones, I think. So, you know.
Super. No, that's great. And yeah, it's lovely to get that context. I think it is really important to recognize that impact across like generation, because we do always tend to go straight away to you know,
to the younger people. Yeah, I think the point is older people have a big influence on younger people as well in terms of their career expectations. And we forget that. And it's sometimes it's subtle, you know, oh, do you really want to be a doctor, or do you really want to, you know, sometimes quite subtle, but influencing them is important as well, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so what we might do, so it's kind of a little bit of scene setting there, and just kind of touching on the reasons why we think things are important. What are some of the barriers in place? Like to probably move more now into driving kind of some of that action and social change. And Zara, I'm going to come back to you and one of your other hats now, which is great. I love a person with many hats. I think we're all the same here. But it'd be great to hear a little bit more about, I guess, the work that you do with Climate Cardinals in terms of, I guess, empowering women, environmental sectors, and also helping make climate solutions a little bit more accessible as well. If you could talk to that a bit.
Yeah, definitely. So at Climate Cardinals, we are one of the largest youth-led climate education NGOs. So the focus is ensuring that education gap is filled. Specifically, the work that we're doing is closing the climate information translation gap. So whether it is women or marginalised groups as a whole, mostly those based in the global south, the access to climate education and understanding what's going on around them physically is very low. And more than that, it's not accessible in their own language as well. So what we're trying to do is close that gap and translate climate information and then disseminate it. And so far we've translated over 3 million words into over 100 languages, and that's all conducted by youth volunteers around the world. And we've impacted over 11 million individuals as well. So there's a few different aspects to that, and as you said, gender is definitely one element of it. I've been very fortunate, I will say, in, you know, obviously She Changes Climate, it's the bedbone of the mission, but also with Climate Cardinals and other organizations that they were founded with 50-50 parity, or, you know, similar to that, being the bedbone and being at the core of the mission anyway. So there isn't as much rechanging that needs to happen, and that is definitely harder. It's just now finessing it and actually just growing it and encouraging others to do the same. But it's definitely something that you can learn from when you're talking about all marginalised groups. So we've been fortunate through building our chapters program over the last year. We now have 138 chapters across 35 countries, and we're directly in contact with people on the grassroots level of the climate agenda. And we're getting to see, you know, those who are more affected than we are by the issues, and hearing from them and understanding and taking what they're saying and applying it directly into the path forward. And when something I've personally realized from that alone is how much that applies on a larger scale to women. It's just purely that listening aspect, and actually taking what they're saying and applying it is so key to all of this. You know, kind of, I think everyone has kind of been touching on this, but that kind of storytelling aspect and that building on those kind of like positive narratives is so key to all of this. And it's something that people are originally hesitant to do, not understanding, you know, why it is that they need to do this. And it's purely just a lack of understanding. And it's once that you've added in that educational piece of this is what it will exactly translate to, that's going to shift the narrative in a way that they understand how it will benefit everyone. So I really think the whole thing is that Climate Cardinal is built on, and whether it's climate information or otherwise, is that education has so much power behind it. It's this untapped area, to be honest. And yeah, there's so much, even with these conversations of sharing that knowledge, and even what Delfina was saying with all the statistics as well, 2% of VC-backed startups, only 2% being by female founders, is insane. And it's just really highlighting them, and then showing that kind of direct correlation of how we can make that change and how it's going to benefit everyone. But yeah, that was a roundabout way of explaining.
No, it's super. But I think like one of the things that really struck me when you were talking about that is just like, and I know it's not simple because you're relying on like a network of volunteers, but just that piece of translating words into like, there's times where we're sitting here and we're caught in the weeds, especially of acronyms and all the stuff that goes along with sustainability, which we'll come to in a second. And it's complex and there's a lot behind it. But then to add to that may not be, that's not in your first language, it's not tailored to your specific environment, so the things we're talking about aren't even relevant to you. I think it's such a powerful intersection to be at, I guess, to also empower people to one, take action, but also demand what they need because they have the knowledge, in that sense. So I just think it's brilliant, really good work.
And I will say as well, like, I think we might even take for granted how much we're used to now, like the climate jargon, and just even when you are even making those kind of translations or sharing that education, is making it in simple terms and making it that messaging and that clear, simple language is so key to make everyone, to the average Joe, make it understandable by everyone. So yeah.
Super, it's great. No, thank you so much for that, Zara. And maybe Sarah then, moving on to regulation and all things ESG matters. Can you maybe give us a little bit of insight into kind of the reg changes that you think are driving gender inclusivity in finance, and maybe what more is needed in that space as well?
Yeah, and it's interesting. So I'm a financial services regulatory specialist by background, so I've been swimming in the alphabet soup for a long time. And you sort of add the ESG itself, an acronym, into that soup, and it is partly understanding each other. And I think it's no accident that when we look back to sort of the EU action plan for sustainable growth and financing sustainable growth back in 2018, it sort of started with the idea that the taxonomy would be critical to unlocking the conversation, because then we would have a language where we could talk to each other instead of past each other. And certainly when I'm working with clients, a lot of our clients have been thinking about these risks and have been thinking about gender diversity in their organizations for years. But CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Sustainable Finance Reporting Directive, they have just brought a new language to talk about things they've been thinking about for a long time. But going back to that action plan, there was this vision that public money was not going to be enough to bring the transition to be. It wasn't going to be enough to transition the European Union to a greener, more sustainable, more circular economy. So you had to have private capital deployed into transitional activities. And the logic in that plan was that they would begin with disclosure rather than mandating action. The idea being that if the market had reliable, readily comparable data, that the capital flows would follow, because they could make a reasoned investment decision based on the information in front of them. And I think it's interesting on the gender side that has been where we started as well. So if we think about gender pay gap reporting, for example, that has just put that information out into the public domain. But even before it was in the public domain, the preparation of that prompted so many great discussions within organizations, including my own, where we've been talking about some of the senior folks. You've got a 50-50 split of your staff across the piece, but of those in the higher paid categories, it's predominantly men. So we're having that conversation. And once we've started having the conversation, in a way, the solutions you start seeking them out.
Yeah.
So I think that has got to be a first really positive step in driving the change in regulation is disclosure. Now, if the dial doesn't move, then I think we have to consider mandating action. But I think disclosure has been a really powerful tool, not just because our clients, at Arthur Cox, our clients challenge us on it. They ask us about it when we're pitching. Our staff ask us about it. Our prospective trainees ask us about it and challenge us to do better. So I think that's really positive. And for the most part, everyone's interested in moving the dial, and everyone's interested in sharing ideas about how we do it. So I think that's positive.
No, that's super. And I think there is a point to that as well. I know with yourself and myself being in advisory, like be relatively familiar with what requirements are and what they look like. But there is a piece as well for, I guess, everyone else to tap into that in terms of having an awareness of what people are being asked to report on in order to ask the questions and to kind of be empowered to ask for that information, knowing that that's something that you should be talking about. And so Andrew, just kind of linked to that, I guess, in terms of measuring and tracking that kind of gender inclusivity piece within financial institutions, I know you've had a bit of experience, I guess, with things like the principles for responsible banking, and that's around, I guess, ensuring accountability and continuous improvement. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that and your experience? It's kind of interlinked with what we've just been chatting about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Of course, it completely follows through what Sarah was saying. It's about the data and having the data and be able to express and understand that. And I guess that's where we've got the advantage on the gender part of diversity. It's obviously more complex across other minorities. We talk about stories, actually. It's a point in time where this really hit home was when Russia invaded Ukraine. I had a Ukrainian lady, was actually the first person I'd hired on sustainability. And the firm I was working for at the time had recorded staff by kind of citizenship, but actually had no understanding of whether they had staff that had Ukrainian backgrounds. And in this particular case, she had her parents on the front line. She was brought up on the front line, and it was, it really hits home that the firms don't have good data. And we see these kind of campaigns to try and get people to sort of self-declare various minority statuses, diversity, and so on. And it's so important because that's right at the heart of it. But we also have a better starting point on gender. But it is complex as well. And, getting the balance across the organization is so fundamental. So the gender pay gap helps inform around seniority of staff. And of course, that then sits alongside the general metrics about absolute numbers of staff. It was really encouraging and great to hear as well. Joanna talked about investment committees. Kathy, you talked about management committees. Right, we can't think about diversity at an entire organization level and just think about numbers overall. And that to me is the fundamental part of it. So you've got to think about how you tell the story at the different levels and the different parts of the organization. And to be clear as well, it's not the right answer to end up with a whole load of all male teams and a whole load of all female teams, right? You've got to get the balance right across an organization. So the framework that I've certainly had experience on is built around the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's really the heart of the organization here. So the Principles of Responsible Banking asks banks to think about which SDG they associate with, align to, and obviously SDG 5 is one that a lot of firms will recognize and draw alignment to. And then the framework asks you to talk about how you're thinking about it in terms of measuring the data, the metrics, the points in the organization where it's relevant, and how you influence that. So it's a great part of the framework to think about what bits of data do we want access to, how do we find that, how do we set sensible targets, and how do we shift that culture and influence and make sure that does disseminate through every part of the organization. And of course, as well, thinking about accountability on gender diversity, we've got to make sure we're also thinking about the the internal side of the story and the external side of the story. So the internal side of the story is the more obvious one, but externally, are we covering and servicing female clients or female-owned, managed clients in the same way that we are male-managed? And we have a part of our business at Wells Fargo where which is labeled diverse segments. We actually have distribution and deliberate activity to distribute product through female-owned businesses or minority-owned businesses. And that's a big part of the structure we have in the US. It works very well. So bringing all these things together and articulating it through those kind of frameworks is fundamental.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. Like the frameworks are there effectively as a tool. There's so many pieces around that. Like you mentioned, kind of those pieces around doing the data collection and the call outs to for people to self-disclose or voluntarily disclose. And I think it's just can't underestimate the culture of an organization to allow people to do that, for people to feel like it's okay for me to do this because of X, Y, Z, or here's the reasoning as to why this is important for the organization to know, and kind of really getting to that point of it's about support, it's about making sure you have everything available to you that you need. And I sometimes feel like that gets lost in translation because there's such a push to get the information in. There's a bit of a risk that you're just going, this is obviously the right thing to do, and people are like, why are you asking me for this stuff, you know? So it's a funny kind of dynamic that we have to deal with quite a lot, I think, in terms of the reporting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And Joanna, I might just come to you, kind of linked to that piece around culture and maybe some of the differences there. I know you work with 100 Women in Finance in both Paris and Dublin. And just, I think it'd be interesting just if you could share maybe some effective strategies or maybe insights around promoting gender equity across the different financial hubs.
Yes, certainly. I guess one of the things that something I've done some work on and we've talked about already is the whole culture piece, is the importance of the culture within the organization you work, in the city in which you work, in the country in which you work. Yes, from my experience with 100 Women, we have two groups of women, one in Dublin and one in Paris. There are more women in our Dublin group than our Paris group, but the way they approach attending events, participating, supporting, sponsoring is just quite different every time. And the importance, and to your point, Kathy, about women and senior women being appreciative when they see other women getting to the top. One of the things that strikes me is that you may feel that there's an awful long way to go in Dublin, in Ireland, for women to take their place at the top table. But compared certainly to France, and I'm British, as you can tell from my accent, the UK as well, you are streets ahead of us. And you're streets ahead of us in exactly what I said at the very beginning, which was, you have to see it to be it. Because there are senior women in a number of areas across the Dublin financial world, graduates coming in can say, well, maybe I can do that. And it has to be said that in France and even in the UK, that's very much less the case. And so the whole culture, anecdotally, I look at our members in Dublin who consider being part of our organization as and correct me if I'm wrong, Aisling, but it's part of their personal promotion, personal development for their careers. Well, in France, it's absolutely not that. In France, because the whole networking piece, and I'll come back to that in a minute, is much less developed. The women, whether they're younger women or more senior women, come to 100 Women in Finance in Paris because they simply meet women in finance who they would not normally meet in their day jobs and have a good time.
Yeah.
There's not the same entirely acceptable discussion about whether this is going well at work or that's interesting or whether there's something we could do together. Right down to, you arrive at an event, and in Dublin, I was most impressed. I know it's a smaller community perhaps than Paris, but everybody comes in and they know a lot of people in the room probably, but they introduce themselves to everybody they don't know.
Yeah.
Whereas in Paris, they go to the group of people they know. So, I mean, it's a tiny example. My point about insights or strategies, I guess, it's really important whether we're talking about work or politics, because without making any comment on the results of the election in the US 3 weeks ago, there is no doubt that the gender piece and the inclusive, exclusive approach played a big role, or even in the wider society. I don't know whether you've read about this, but there's a case that has caught the imagination, and more than that, of the French press, and more broadly, a multiple rape case in the south of France. And the reaction of the public and now government to this man's abuse of his wife, both himself and a whole lot of other people. He hasn't even yet been condemned technically, although he's admitted it. But already the Minister for Women is stepping up with new suggestions about how to deal with women, violence against women, and so forth, which to me is really rather interesting, because France is a country which is a little bit more, to my mind, a little bit more conservative than it might appear from the outside. But coming back to the point about insights, I guess it's about, I think we've got to be able to have those conversations, and it can't be an us and them sort of discussion, whether it's gender or ethnicity or background or experience. It's not about what you look like or where you're from, but it's what do you have in common and that you can develop in common. I'm even getting to the point where, oh, not another diversity event. Or, female empowerment. Well, haven't you got enough? When you're talking about events or initiatives in your organization, it's almost as if we have done that, and I think the discussion needs to be really around my own experience. It's not really about us talking about us women. It's about the culture that we live and work in and how we change that. And this hideous case in the south of France is another example of that. People said, well, how is that possible? Well, because nobody talked about it, because nobody admitted it, because nobody believed it could be possible, even her children. And it's really important to see how, and several of you on the panel have talked about the importance of where women lead economic initiatives around the world successfully. And that, if it works from an economic as well as society point of view, well, why shouldn't it work elsewhere? And then the other side of the coin, where, what does parenting look like to male employees? What does that really look like in work practices? How does that work in structures like partnerships and VC organizations and so forth? And I think the whole gender lens investing is part of that discussion, particularly within our world. There are organizations like Impactor in the UK, where a women-led third world infrastructure debt investment fund. And they're getting real traction.
Yeah.
So insights, I guess it's about culture, and it's about talking to each other, and it's about not being us and them, I think.
Yeah, super. I think that's great, Joanna, and just, yeah, I think just touching on what you've said there in terms of, and maybe bringing it back to what Delfina was talking about in terms of setting up that charter and recognising, I think there's frameworks and structures that we can leverage across multiple different centres, but recognising there's also cultural considerations, and there's hard work behind that to get behind it. And for me, there's a big piece of, I guess, community engagement, which kind of comes back to what you were talking about, Zara, and making sure you build space for that as well, to be able to influence those frameworks working well. Otherwise, we won't get anywhere. We're kind of stuck, if you know what I mean.
And there was just one final piece on the culture. We did an event in Paris talking about reporting and regulatory requirements either side of the Atlantic, and the pros and cons, and how people approach them. And in France, it's very particularly regulatory and legislative, as I'm sure you know, Sarah, more so than certainly in the US. And I was a little concerned that there would be an us and them, and this is the right way and that's the wrong way. And actually, it was none of that. We had several financial professionals from our industry, and we had the CFO from a major independent French organization, and all of them said, well, it's different and it's entirely complementary and it all just has to happen, but we need to have these conversations.
Yeah, super, super. That's great. And look, I guess kind of looking ahead and looking at solutions and future perspectives, I'm going to jump around a little bit now and make sure everybody's still awake. Kathy, I'm going to come to you on this one. As we kind of look to the future, how do you see the role of capital markets evolving in terms of, I guess, supporting gender responsive and socially inclusive investments, and maybe kind of what role does AIB play in that as well? It'd be great to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, I think it has there's a huge role, right, and a huge amount of influence, and was talked about a little bit yesterday, specifically around gender. Delfina put some stats up. Like, it is shocking, and Zara, you mentioned it. You know how there's certain areas of financial services that are incredibly male dominated still, and the whole investment piece is one of them, and that's a very powerful industry. They controlling the vast sums of money they're invested through all the pension funds, etc., is just a huge piece. So I can talk about it in an AIB context. I have responsibility for managing our private equity investments, and we're proud to say I think we're the largest private investor into Irish PE firms. We've about 400 million invested, but within that, I constantly, the team sort of shudder when I'm walking in the door, knowing what I'm going to say, which is, of these firms, how many of the partners are female? What's the diversity within the PE firms themselves, and then within the investments they're making? What is the diversity within those management teams? And then the other piece is how much are they taking cognizant of ESG issues and the investments they're making, and that broader climate piece. So at the moment, it's quite, I guess it's soft metrics. The firms do track it, they do report back to us on it, but we haven't set targets per se. And I would say it's quite challenging, because if you did a study, there probably has been, but if you took private companies in Ireland and looked at the management teams, it's pretty male dominated. And in certain sectors, I'll pick maybe on engineering or construction, or it's incredibly male dominated. And so even from a pure investment perspective, I get nervous when I see these management teams and say, oh my God, this, what group think? It's not it's all engineers, it's all male engineers, and it's very talented people. But is there any sort of diversity there in terms of the thinking? So there is a real role to play here in trying to influence. We also try to provide offerings that give our investors, our wealth management customers, an opportunity to invest in ESG and options, and we ask them questions about their preferences. I have to say, it's an evolving process. I think at the moment it's not that high as we might like to see it on the agenda, particularly when you come down to individual investors. So there's a lot more that will evolve there, but I hope it will become a much bigger feature as we move forward. But then, I said the pension fund industry has a huge role to play here in terms of what it expects, because it's representing society, Andrew, to your point, right? So what do we expect, and where does capital get diverted to, and being very conscious of it. So. But my plug is more women in private equity. Please go into it. It's a fantastic career. I want more women in wealth management as well. Again, it's a fantastic career that I think we're completely underrepresented in. And bond markets, there's hardly a woman to be found. And equity investment as well, very male dominated. The analyst community, very male dominated. So we're missing a huge trick here as the female cohort. And we've just got to push those careers a little bit more, because I think it's fantastic opportunities. And I think what gets missed is how influential you can be in these roles, right? This is where you can really, over time, as you get more senior in your career, you can make a real difference. Yeah.
No, that's super, Kathy. And maybe Andrew then kind of link into that. I know you have kind of extensive experience on the London trading floors as well. So you probably know what Kathy's talking to firsthand. But maybe just on that, like what role can senior leadership play in kind of fostering a culture of gender inclusivity in these kind of traditionally male-dominated sectors?
Yeah, it's, in fact, just perhaps take a quick step back, because I think it is tradition and it is culture that we're sort of trying to tackle and address here. And, before I get to London, I actually, I grew up in Asia, I spent quite a bit of time there, and there was a different dynamic in some of the locations, and we need to sort of learn and understand from how this has developed. In Hong Kong, when I started working in the 80s, there was an all-female trading floor, but based on sort of private investment where it was a traditional sort of female role of looking after domestic finances. And actually the same's happened in Japan where traditionally, and it goes all the way back to medieval times and the samurais, and it was always the female of the house that looked after finances, and you end up with a stronger female focus on the workforce of sort of selling these financial products. But certainly when you come to London and the Western market, for sure, there is a more macho, male-dominated kind of history, and we need to sort of see how that evolves, and it's finding ways to change the culture and thinking about what are the levers and the drivers that make a difference. Clearly, a big part of it is the social side. So whether it's out of the office and drinking, and the role that drinking and social events plays, the sort of the interactions and so on that actually exist on a trading floor. But I'm also keen to sort of learn from some of the changes we've seen more recently, because I'm really encouraged that there's been other kind of external influences, if you like, that have kind of helped, and how we can think about those a bit more. So, technology is the first one. We think about what COVID's done to us. So there's different parts of that. First of all, actually, when I started working in London, and this is in the 90s now, there was an open outcry trading floor. So we actually had 200-300 people formed in a kind of a concentric circles around a head trader, and the whole group were male, and the dynamics and the sort of the boisterousness of this open outcry, but that's been replaced by computers, and computers have changed the way we trade, and that's been more inclusive. Of course, COVID has created more opportunity for people to work from home. I work from home now 2 days a week, whereas I've never, in 30 plus years of working, been able to do that before, and never felt I could do that before. And that's helped a lot of people. COVID for me was a fascinating one. I really hold the view that the initial early times in COVID, so sort of I guess Q2, March 2020, when it started, I could really see it hurting the female cohort within our staff, and that seemed to then reflect a domestic situation where you'd be on a meeting, and I had multiple females at different times say, "Sorry, Andrew, I can't do that meeting because I need to make my husband lunch." I was like, how is that? How are we even having that conversation? It just doesn't make sense. But unfortunately, it does reflect perhaps the domestic culture as well, and how does that extend from the corporate culture, and how do we sort of think about that? But that should not be the case. That really shouldn't be the case, but it was. Perhaps overall will reflect that having kind of gone through those COVID times, that it's been more favourable, more positive to diversity, in particular gender diversity. But no, I think those early days were tough. So it's thinking through all these different steps, and how can we influence the strategy of the culture, the development of the culture within an organisation. It's such a complex area that we've got to keep thinking through. I also find, for the future, AI is going to be interesting. When we think about kind of echo chambers and so on. AI is the biggest echo chamber is out there and the most dangerous one if not used correctly. And we've got to be careful that that doesn't create a worse situation for diversity in organizations.
Super. Yeah, very interesting to see where that goes. A terrifying echo chamber, but also relatively useful when you have a question and gives you an answer back. And I say thank you to ChatGPT, and it's like no problem. I'm like, oh, okay. No, super. Thanks for that, Andrew. Sarah, just in the interest of time and absolutely no pressure, but I'm going to come to you to wrap up this panel discussion because you have a really meaty question that I'd like to ask. What is one change that you would like to see in the next 5 years regarding gender inclusivity and social finance?
And we are short of time, and it is something you want somebody to remember when they take away. So I want to see us and them turn into we.
Yeah, very good.
That's what I want to see. So when you're talking to a leadership team and you've got a question that's going to impact women more than men in your workforce, it's not that you look to the women on the board to come up with the answer. It's we are looking for that answer. So we're moving on, and so it's us and them turning into we as we pull together, not just on increasing gender diversity, but on all diversity, where we're all working together to create a better environment and a better culture, to use a word we've heard a lot of today, to move forward.
Super, that was an absolutely fabulous answer. Well done. I couldn't have done that better myself, though I'm not going to attempt to. So look, just to say thank you to everybody for taking the time today to be part of this discussion. I know I find it just really interesting. It's great to keep these conversations going. I know sometimes we feel like we're covering old ground, but I think unless we're talking about it and we're being vocal and we're talking about our actions, we're not going to see any progress forward. So it's just about everybody empowering each other to continue these conversations in whatever area, sector, space that you're in. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all the panelists, including Joanna online. Thank you so much for joining us virtually. It's been great to have you. And thanks again to the guys for putting this session together. I think this is our 6th collaboration with 100 Women in Finance, which is amazing. So I'm just going to wrap up the panel discussion, and I'm going to hand over to Rory Sullivan, who is going to come up and give us some insights on the upcoming social finance report. So thanks, everybody. Exit.
Okay, thank you, Aisling, and thank you to the panel. I was struck by something Joanne said, which was this gender issue, I'm going to start with gender, is about the culture we live and work in. I'm actually going to be more explicit and say it's actually about power and influence. And rather than thinking about empowerment and how we can be nice to each other, it's actually about how do we shape, evolve and develop the world we live in. I am going to present the initial insights from work we have done on behalf of ISCFOE. Shall I move on my slides? You don't need to see that one. I would like to thank my colleagues Cora and Ash, who are down at the front, who have done a lot of the legwork to inform this, and also the ISF COE team, Radhika, Gillian, Colette, and Stephen, who have championed and led this work. But I think when we think about how we make progress on gender issues, I think it's important that we're also very clear-eyed about what we're looking at, and that we are prepared to face the harsh truths that underpin this. Harsh truth number 1, there is no financial case for gender equity. Harsh case number 2 is that gender tends to be mixed in with a whole range of social and inequality and other issues. And so if you want to make progress on gender issues, you have to understand the way in which those issues are framed and how they're often presented as secondary to or incidental to a primary issue. So, I mean, the classic example at the moment is climate change. Climate change is the main goal. There is a nod to just transition. There's a nod to the gender impacts of climate change, but gender issues are not shaping or informing the decisions we're taking. That's the world we live in. I don't say it with any particular joy, but I think it's important that when we think about how we affect change, we start by being honest with ourselves about the world we're in, what the status is, and how we then move it forward. The other thing I would like to say is that I am going to be a little bit provocative over the next few minutes, but this is part of the research process. We are genuinely looking for insights and challenge. So if people would like to contribute to the research or disagree, if anybody wants to, or agree or reinforce, please do so. I mean, this is an ongoing research project, and so we are looking for feedback. Our projects on this, it is about gender and social and inequality issues in investment. Our focus is slightly different to panel, apart perhaps from the comments that Kathy made, which were about investment process. Our focus is exclusively on investment process rather than on gender equality and representation within the investment industry. So it's just a different focus. The aim is to understand the current state of play, and then is to make recommendations on how we make progress. Moving on, to do that, we've reviewed what's happening internationally. We have reviewed what Ireland's largest financial institutions, large banks, major investment houses, and various others are doing on social, gender, inequality issues. And then we've conducted a series of interviews with practitioners across the market to understand what they're doing. What do we see? We see that there's, actually I think part of my slide's gone missing here, but anyway, there's a lot going on. One really important framing issue is that a lot of gender issues are not going to be understood or acted on through the Gender Finance Charter. It's actually the task force on TISFD, Task Force on Inequality and Social Related Financial Disclosures. So what we're going to see is gender and inequality issues are going to be dealt within that broader lens of social issues. So if we are concerned about equality/inequality issues, that is going to be really influential in how institutions respond on this issue. And I think we're also seeing a set of sort of regulation, much of which is about kind of avoiding harm, but not necessarily about creating positive incentives to do well or to do good. I mean, it was interesting that I think it was Andrew mentioned the principles for responsible banking, and similarly PRI, they all have programs of work, but I would again say that they're dealing with social issues as kind of a bit of an amorphous blob, to be blunt, probably as an adjunct to environmental issues at the moment, and certainly gender issues are not getting called out and treated as explicitly as a primary issue of concern. And I say that because that is the reality we're dealing with. We now have to think about how we might shape and influence those to give due attention to the issues we are concerned about. I've got two slides which are sort of presenting some of the initial findings. The first slide focuses on global investors and global investors present in Ireland. And the second slide just reflects a little bit on investors in Ireland. And unfortunately, Kathy stole most of my punchlines for the second slide. So I'm feeling discriminated against. But anyway, I'm not taking it too personally. Okay, so the first thing is that most investment managers are not really looking at social issues explicitly. They are dealing with them as a kind of a thing to be dealt with once they've dealt with the primary goals of responding to climate change or delivering investment returns. This is important because my view on investment is if something is not an explicit goal, then you're relying on dumb luck for it to happen. You know, you don't, those who work in finance, which I think most of the room do, know that unless you set a goal, unless you say this is explicitly important to us, it's the purpose of deliberate activity, you've no guarantees it will happen. It might happen. So every financial institution has good case studies. Most of them have not been done by design. They've just been by happenstance or good luck. The second point, which is really important to Ireland, is that global investors either frame their approaches to inequality issues or diversity issues, either by reference to global frameworks, TISFD is going to be the main one, or by reference to the issues that are important in their home market. So what you see is that the issues that might be of concern to Irish stakeholders You know, so which I would, maybe if I could summarize as the representation of women at various level of management in Irish companies, not hugely important to international investors. They're more concerned about the issues that are relevant to their home companies and the issues that are relevant to their home country. Sustainable development goals are widely cited. Again, let's be blunt, you know, they're a lovely fig leaf. They make everybody feel good. And every institutional investor worth his or her salt has an SDG badge, but they're not really driving change. I don't think. I think again, you find it maybe at the margins, but not central to the purpose they set for themselves. And the other thing, which is, I guess, it is probably an interesting note, which I think points, again, the panel talked a lot about the role of disclosure, is most of the voting activity has focused on sort of females on boards and board sort of male-female ratios. Why? Because it's one of the few things where we have consistent disclosures. So it has allowed investors to set targets or objectives or to define good or bad performance. So voting activity, which is one of the key tools available to investors, does get deployed, but to do so you need disclosures and you need the ability to then vote or signal your expectations on the issue. So they're the kind of big global pictures. The Irish ones, so to be fair, the Irish institutional investors do a lot in Ireland, do a lot on social finance. I think we've heard a lot about how they encourage sort of gender equality and fair representation through levels of their organization, acknowledging it's not perfect, but I do think they've made huge progress. What is really interesting is that if we understand our problem as being our challenge as being to change the shape and structure of Irish business more generally, let's go outside financial services, who's going to drive that? Well, the only people who really drive that are not the international investors, they're the domestic investors. So the domestic asset managers, because they will tend to have the largest holdings in Irish companies, they'll tend to have the closest relationships with management. Critically, one of the key insights from the research is that the driver for them to do so is missing. What makes asset managers jump? It's what their asset owner clients ask them to do. So we went through, I think it was like half a dozen of the largest pension funds. There is little or nothing on their websites or in their disclosures about how they address gender issues in their investment practices or in their expectations of their investment managers. The key lever, so go back to my point at the beginning about power and influence, the single most important lever in this market is the role of asset owners and the asset owners' demands that they make of their asset managers, and they are not doing it. If you care about gender issues in Ireland, you should be standing outside those organisations with your placards saying, we care, why don't you? I'm almost done. Okay, the last thing which may be a question for the audience and perhaps thinking about how some of the insights from the panel get taken forward is the question we are concerned about in this room global gender issues and global inequality issues or domestic, i.e. within Ireland? The reason I say that is that the strategies for affecting those are different. If you're concerned about global, then you're focusing on large global institutional investors. You are talking about getting involved in TISFD, which I believe ISFCOE is quite involved with. So you're talking to people like Stephen Nolan going, make sure that gender issues get covered there, because that is the game in town. That is the thing that will drive the way in which global investors look at gender issues and in turn start driving those expectations through corporates, through active ownership and engagement, and through voting. If you are concerned about Ireland, you know, the gender representation in Irish business and Irish industry, it is the Irish pension funds you have to target. They are missing in action, but they are the key lever that this community can influence. So they're the questions. I don't know what the answer is. it is for you as individual organizations and as individuals to decide where you want to focus, but work out what your priority is. The levers then come into very clear focus and then go after them. This is not for the faint-hearted. This is about naked power. Honestly, I don't care about empowerment and working together and the power of we. Like, it's inspiring. If you want to make change, it is all about what levers you have, what tools you have, and are you prepared to use them with force, purpose, persistence, and I would use the word aggression. This is not playtime. Last slide. I would love to hear your views. And I believe we've got some time for questions if people would like to respond. But please contact us, or speak with Ash and Cora afterwards. And I look forward to your thoughts and reflections. Thank you. I think we have time. So does anybody have questions or responses? Oh, there's a microphone. Brilliant. Thank you.
I'll kick it off, Rory.
Excellent, thank you.
Since I annoyed you so much. No, do you think Ireland is evolving? I mean, and at what pace? Yeah. And you can you can be honest.
Yeah. Okay, so the answer is, on one level, of course, Ireland is evolving and has evolved drastically over the last 20 or 30 years. I think that's self-evident. But when we then think about what we're seeing, so when I look at gender, what you start with is entry into the workforce, and you see, I think the stats in Ireland's education are that higher proportion of females than males go to university or certainly graduate at the end. In most organizations, what we see, let's say there's some male-dominated industries like engineering, where there's kind of more men who do engineering, unfortunately. I did engineering, so I feel like I can criticize my peers. I think like most European countries, what we see is that things go pretty well for the first 3, 5, 7 years of females in the workforce. They tend to progress at broadly similar rates to men. Broadly, the gender pay gap isn't that visible until we hit that dreaded age of 28, 29 through to mid-30s. And I think, so the first point I would say is that the way in which Ireland, like every other European country, deals with maternity leave and career interruptions caused by having children means that you go 10 years on, you roll to your late 30s, and what you see is, women working part-time, because they've got family and other responsibilities, and the gender pay gap manifests itself. And I think that's a very difficult thing to come back from. And I think where we struggle in Ireland is then, how do you allow women who are at that stage but ready to come back into the workforce fuller time, maybe not full time, and how we then accelerate them through. So I think that is the particular challenge in Ireland.
I might just come back on that one. I mean, I think what we're looking at, we see that challenge within AIB. We're trying to do a lot more work before someone goes on maternity leave, maybe offering them to engage while on maternity leave, and talking to them much more about career, before, after, ongoing. And I think organizations were really poor about that. There was, the time is taken off, but the organization switched off from those individuals often, completely unnecessarily. So we've certainly learned a bit through that, and we're trying to change tack going forward.
And actually, if I may, I'm going to say something possibly controversial, which is actually there's so much for other Irish industries to learn from the finance sector. The banks and the investment institutions probably have been the leaders on trying to deal with that problem.
Yeah, my question actually was more around investment, investment following ESG principles. Do you see that? Sort of gathering any sort of pace? Yeah.
Okay. So there are two different parts of that. So let's deal with equity investment. So effectively, it's secondary market stuff. I would say investors need to challenge companies on what they're doing. That's the lever you have there. It's not so much buying and selling shares doesn't necessarily hugely change anything. It is the dialogue that investors have with the companies they're invested in. And you talked about culture. Is gender on the agenda? What are they looking at? Are they actually asking the right questions? Not about board representation. So it's quite interesting. That's the focus, and it's good. But I mean, what's happening. There's a small cohort of females who are on lots of boards, and they're in big demand, but we're actually not creating like the pyramid or the broad base underpins them of people in senior leadership or the middle to senior management. So I think there is, on in equity markets, in large companies, I think it is that question of, are you prepared to analyze how companies are doing it and to challenge them on what they're doing? In private markets, it's less my area, but there does appear to be a systemic bias against female entrepreneurs and female-led businesses. Now, the question that I don't know the answer to, sorry, when I say systematic bias, there's a systematic difference. I don't know, is it because it's male investors investing in male-run companies, or is it simply that the proportion and quality of female-led companies coming for finance, or is it that females don't look to that market for investment? I think it's not my area, so I don't have a diagnosis, but perhaps you might from your work. Yeah. But I think then you go, so each of those elements have solutions, so if it's men investing in men, then you go, that's a gender representation, or is it targets? You could have informal company targets on types of businesses or types of ownership structures you invest, and you do see some of that. I'd say most of it's been, you've kind of end up in echo chambers. You end up with like little women-oriented funds, and that's fine. That's good, but actually, this is about change at scale. And I think it's the big institutions in Ireland, AIB, Bank of Ireland, etc., who are particularly interesting in that regard. And I would acknowledge your leadership. I think you've done a lot of the banks have done really good work, but yeah, it's thinking about how we do more in that. But thank you, Kathy.
Hi, that was great. I have a somewhat controversial question around disclosure and whether you believe that additional disclosures are actually going to fundamentally move capital. I have a real bugbear that the answer to every problem is an additional disclosure, and that we have reached a point in particular on sustainability where we're drowning in disclosures and more coming down, but will it actually shift to pension fund when they have your 600 data points under CSRD to move money into your company when it hasn't done to date? And on the gender side, we've had UK pay reporting for 5 years. It hasn't either shifted the gender pay gap report in the companies, or do I believe it's shifted fundamental capital one way or the other? So I wouldn't mind your own view as to whether will additional disclosures, hundreds of additional disclosures that are coming down the line, actually move money in any way, shape or form if it doesn't affect return?
The answer is it depends, but actually that's not a very helpful answer. So let me explain. So I assume most of you have done some economics. So it depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So if your problem is one of market failures, I don't know, let's go greenhouse gas emissions not being priced for the externalities that are caused, disclosure makes no difference. It comes down fundamentally to the incentive. If the problem is one of bounded rationality, i.e. something's not on a management team's agenda, disclosure can be very helpful because you sort of force them to gather the information, to think about what they mean, maybe set targets. Some of the issues in gender and inequality stem from people just not, it's not that they're bad people, they've just never been required to think about it. So if your diagnosis of the problem is information is bounded rationality, then encouraging people to be more rational or think more long-term can help, and disclosure does help there. If it is about will pension funds make decisions based on this stuff? Now, there's two different parts of that. So one is, for most companies, gender and inequality is not in the top 3 or 5 important issues of the business. So the investment thesis for investing in a power company or CRH or whoever is often driven by, global prices of their commodity, how cost effectively they produce it, etc. What disclosure can do in those cases is a set of questions investors can ask the management team. So disclosure allows, hopefully, for informed dialogue with company management teams, but A, you need good disclosures, and B, you need your investor to ask the questions. And this goes back to my point about the asset owners. The asset owners are not, in Ireland, are not challenging their asset managers to ask those questions. So I would say disclosure is an easy way out. Everybody does disclosure because it's the cheapest thing you can do. You know, what's the answer to them? Oh, we need a bit more information. Like, God, that's 5 years. The number of social issues I've kicked into the long grass by going, we need more disclosure, and by the time it comes along, people have forgotten about it. So I would say disclosure is often used as an excuse for inaction, but I think that's our fault. We've allowed that to happen. Disclosure can be valuable if you're dealing with bounded rationality, trying to get an issue on the management team's agenda, and it can be helpful if it's an information asymmetry problem, but it requires somebody to use the information. I would say my criticism of disclosure has not been too many data points, whatever. It is just the disclosure has been delivered and nobody's used it. And therefore, I think exactly the point you've then raised is then, does it drive change? The answer is no. But I generally don't think it's because the disclosure itself is wrong or useless. It's just people have not then taken disclosure and used it to challenge or to signal their views, etc. The other thing I would say, going back to my point about asset owners, is I would actually say that encouraging better asset owner disclosure in Ireland would be transformative, because the absence of disclosure means nobody can look at what their pension fund's doing and saying, what are you doing on the issue I care about? So I think there's the disclosure creates accountability. And so one of the, if you're to say, what's a quickish fix to some of the issues we've talked about today, I think encouraging asset owners to say where they stand on gender and inequality issues, and then what are they doing about it, would, I think, catalyze a discussion and probably quite a lot of action quite quickly. And if I'm wrong, you would know within about a year. But I'd say disclosure is not a panacea, but disclosure can help on particular but it depends on the characteristics of the problem you're trying to solve. But I do think on gender and diversity, the progress we have seen has been where we've had good disclosures across the market. But I'm very happy for people to disagree on that or to.
Hi, Deirdre Lane, Natural Capital Ireland. Rory, great job again. My question now is, we have the disclosure, we have the facts on the gender pay inequality. Is there any company brave enough to reduce the fees in the same proportion for female investors to invest in projects that we really support?
I think there have, again, I think a number of the gender funds have done that because basically by requiring the champions of projects to be female, or to have, a 50-50 management structure, whatever. So it doesn't necessarily have to be reduced fees. It can just be targeted. X% of our money is going to a particular group. And you've seen it in other minority and disadvantaged groups. So I think it's quite feasible, but it may not be price differential. That may not be the way it manifests itself. Having a target on the percentage of a fund or product that goes to a particular group. Sorry, I always find it weird saying a particular group when I'm talking about half the world's population, but to a specific group is another way of doing it. So I think I'd say the answer is it can be done. It's not particularly hard to do, but it just may have a slightly different form just than to reduce fees for females or male business owners or project leaders. I can tell it's late in the day, everybody's going, oh, please just let me out of here. Okay, so can I wrap up if I just may go back to myself. This is a really important issue. It is important because TISFD is coming. So we're going to see a framework. It is really important for how we take Ireland to the next stage on gender equality. I think the panel showed how much progress that has been made. The fact that females are allowed to present on a panel in and of itself is a performance metric. But I think there is more to be done in Ireland. This project is trying to help frame that. If you have ideas on what would be useful, as our focus is on investment practice and perhaps on financing practice more generally, please feed your ideas through or get in touch, and we'd be very happy to chat further. So with that, am I closing today, Radical? Do I close it? So can I say thank you everybody for attending, thank you for participating, safe home, and look forward to speaking to you soon. Thank you.